Hey, good evening, people who are out there watching us on this is our fourth Coding Connect interview with great people and educators who are involved with programming. Tonight we have an awesome guest who I'll introduce in a second, and I'm sure many of you know her. But first I want to introduce my kind of co-companion tonight, also part of Coding Connect, Brian. Brian, how's it going?
Going well. Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And you guys are getting some rain out there in California?
Yeah, about 5 inches and what was it, about 50-mile-per-hour winds today?
Wow, so like a minor hurricane almost.
Yeah, kind of. Our pool's overflowing a little bit, so but we need it, so I can't complain.
That's a reference I don't get in Wisconsin. Pool, what's a pool?
The pool is frozen over.
Yeah. All right. So the person we're all here to talk to and learn from tonight is Vicky Sedgwick. Vicky, thank you for joining us tonight.
Glad to be here.
All right. And I know personally, I mean, you've helped me a lot, kind of on my journey with programming. So I know I'm appreciative of that, and I'm excited to share with other people if they don't already know you, because they should by now if they're interested in coding. But we'll try and catch everybody because you've got a lot of great stuff to share.
Oh, great.
So,
thanks.
yeah, I'm a good cheerleader. All right, so why don't we just start with a really simple question, and I kind of know the answer to this, but I don't know the full story. So when did you first experience programming?
Well, it was a really long time ago, probably before you were born. I'm old, so I first experienced it actually in college a little bit. My college roommate was a computer science major, but this is when it was all mainframe machines and punched cards to program them. So I'd go and sometimes, try and help her debug programs and things like that. But I really first got into programming after college. I actually went to work as a computer programmer, a computer operator on Business Basic machines. They were machines made by MAI Basic 4, and they were programmed in Business Basic, but I was actually an operator. I would do all the operations, make the business run. It was a healthcare firm. And while I was there, they converted from the Business Basic machines to Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC 20s, and the programmers all started writing the new code for the new systems, all in COBOL, but we still had to keep the old systems running because some of our clients, some of what they did wouldn't work on the new systems yet, and we had a lot of history on there. So I basically taught myself to program on that, and so that we could keep it running. So I would create custom things or fix bugs, or this client needed a report that we didn't used to have, so we would pull it out and things like that. So I taught myself then, and that was back in the late 70s, so was when I first started programming. And Business Basic, a lot of people think, oh, basic, I learned that in school and you can't do much with it. Well, this was a pretty sophisticated version of BASIC, and you could run multi-million-dollar companies on this version of BASIC. You could write functions in it and do a lot of things like that. So we were running one of the largest, basically HMOs in Orange County on it. That's what we were running on it. So that's where I first got started. So many years ago. Do you want me to keep going with my long story, Josh?
Well, we could probably get back to that later. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting twists and turns along the way. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, I think for a lot of us, and I know I'm speaking for me especially, I am passionate about it only because I see the benefits, not because I really have a background or know that much. So I think it's great, to have someone like you who was in it, like really in it, and in it, and you've been able to see it transform over time. So
by a lot.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I have trouble wrapping my mind around. And I don't always understand, like, how does somebody write a code that becomes a language? Like, that part to me baffles my mind, and and what was the point? Like, maybe I don't know if you can exactly speak to that, but like, why do new languages come about?
Well, I think a lot of times it's because somebody sees a need, like COBOL, for example, came about because, and Grace Hopper was involved in that, you know, one of the original pioneers and stuff. They needed something for businesses, and it was one of the original languages. So it came about because they needed something that could run businesses, that could run accounting software or distribution software or whatever kind of thing the business needed. And before that, a lot of stuff was written in machine code. You know, you had to write in, basically in binary. You had to do the zeros and the ones and do switches and things like that. And so the COBOL was one of the first higher level languages that actually got compiled. Now I know that Business Basic came about because we wanted something, the people who created it wanted something that wasn't compiled. Business Basic was an interpreted language, which meant if an update died in the middle, for example, let's say we had you know, an accounting department running an end of month report and it died in the middle, it would actually error out and we could fix it live right there and keep running. But a compiled language, you couldn't do that with. It would die, you'd have to then fix it, recompile it, and start it over from scratch usually. So it made running a business more efficient. You didn't have to, you know, you could tweak things on the fly as they were running. So it was slower than a compiled language, but it took less memory in a lot of cases. We had almost no memory. It was really funny. There were mini computers I worked on, but they weren't mini the way you think of mini. They were about the size of a little shorter than a refrigerator. And they were kind of the size of what a refrigerator was. But the disk space was maybe 60 megabytes of disk. You had to swap disks in and out in order to run the business. So it was an interesting time. I wasn't with the, you know, you have to flip switches time, but I was involved when the computers didn't have near the power. I mean, we would write code, and there used to be a joke that good programmer, you know, of course we don't document our programs in our programs because if it's hard to write, it should be hard to understand. But it really, the real reason we didn't document it was that took memory, and we didn't have memory, so documentation within the program was almost nil because we couldn't afford the memory or the program wouldn't run. So it was a very interesting time. But I think new languages come about because somebody sees, you know, something they want to improve on, like Swift, for example. They want to improve on how people develop applications for iOS devices. So they're trying to simplify it. So Swift is simpler than, you know, using the older Xcode things. You know, it's a little easier for people to use. So I think they're trying to remove that barrier that some people run into and give more people the chance to write apps, for example. So
yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, you've seen a lot of things come and go from that time. I love your cat, by the way. She just jumped up there. Well, yeah. I kind of lock myself in the office here, but the cat wants in, so I keep hearing her meowing. I guess next time I'm going to bring her to the party because she'll have a friend.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. So I guess a natural question coming off of that would be, so you've worked in some really kind of esoteric type languages. I hope I'm using that word right. You know, you've worked in the really, like, I guess most people, they would interpret it much more difficult languages. And now today you have all of these games and apps, and then you have Scratch and Hopscotch and all of these. So as somebody who learned to program the hard way, I guess, what is your view on those tools and kind of how we as educators really like to champion those?
Well, Scratch is one of my personal favorites, actually. I use it a lot with a lot of grades. I think it's a great introduction for students because it's a very powerful language, even though it's blocks, but it's very powerful in what it can do. And so I really enjoy using it. And I really wish there was an easier transitional path to traditional, let's write it in a real language, because that's a barrier I find with my students. They can't see that transition. And I think one of the things that Code.org has been trying to do with their stuff is you can look at the code. You can peek under the hood and see kind of what it's doing. They've written a lot of functions that you're calling that you don't know what those do, but there's, you can see at least some of the basic JavaScript that it's writing. So I think that's a help. I think it's great because I think it's very difficult to take, especially like an elementary student, and say, okay, you're going to learn, we're going to teach you JavaScript. It's just not going to happen. Okay, for most kids, that would be like, what do you mean I'm missing a semicolon and now it doesn't work, and the brackets are in the wrong place. And I think teaching them how to think like a programmer, how to write a function, how to write loops, how to write conditionals using something like Scratch gets them thinking in that mindset. And by the time, if they grow up and decide they want to do this, by the time they get there, who knows what the language is going to be. So knowing how to do it, what the terminology is, what it means to write a conditional, that's what's going to help them. It's really not that difficult to pick up the syntax of a new language. It's very difficult sometimes to understand, well, how do I write a function? What does a function do? That kind of stuff. So if we can teach them that in an easier way, I think it's great. I think it's a great way to start with the kids, for sure.
Awesome. Very cool. And I know that's something that another gentleman that we just interviewed, Manan Shah, I'm sure you've probably seen him on Twitter, and we got the privilege of talking to him. And that's almost what he said was he didn't really go into programming right away and never really thought of it as a career, but he had exposure to it at different points. So when he was kind of at a point where he was stuck and not really sure what to do, like, he was able to pick up programming because he'd had those little like breadcrumbs along the way. Right. So I think we're just trying to distribute more breadcrumbs to more people, and they're tastier.
That's right, and they're much more palatable, because if you say to them you have to write it in this way and very formal syntax, you're going to lose an awful lot of kids. So whereas if you say, hey, do this in Scratch and make your name dance around, well, that's fun. But even if I had to write that in JavaScript or in Python, you're going to lose a lot of kids.
Yeah.
That blocky language is, again, it is very palatable. I thought I just read research that the freshmen at UC Berkeley in their intro to computer science class are using the blocky language to kind of introduce that before they get into the actual JavaScript writing.
Right. I've seen a lot. I've looked a lot at the Harvard CS50. I think it's Harvard that's CS50. And it was some of the online, CS classes, and they almost all of them start with Scratch or some kind of block-based language initially, because these are intro to computer science classes, so they're not kids, even as freshmen in college, that know how to write code. So now they ramp up very quickly, a lot quicker than we are going to do in elementary or middle school. But though in middle school you can start getting into some actual languages, and it depends on how much time you have and the kids you have too. So.
Very cool. So naturally, my question to anybody who is out in industry and has careers like that, what's that transition into education? Because I know a number of teachers that did come from a business background or a different background and made it to education, whereas most teachers are education from the get-go. So when did you make that transition, and why?
Well, education was my first choice. I majored in elementary education in college. Okay. But at that time, there was an abundance of teachers. And like I said, my roommate was in computer science, and I found that also interesting. So rather than student teaching, I got a job. and ended up getting a job as a computer operator in the company my roommate worked at, and then transitioned into programming and did that for almost 20 years. And then ended up being a stay-at-home mom after my youngest daughter was born, mainly because the company I was working for, the company that I ended up working for sold their software division to a company in Connecticut. Well, I live in California. And for a while, they let me telecommute. There was a few of us that did that, and they let us telecommute. And then eventually they said, okay, we want you to move to Connecticut. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. My husband's job is here. And so I ended up, and it was good timing because I just had another baby. So I went, okay, I'll stay at home for a while with the kids. And then when my youngest daughter was in 6th grade, the computer teacher at her school left, and I had a relationship with the school. I was on the school board, and I did the yearbook at the school, and I was very involved. And I'd been in and out of the computer classes doing some things, like I had the 8th graders working on the yearbook and things like that during computer classes. So when she left, she recommended me for the job. So the principal basically said, please, 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 you have to come do it. And at the time, I really wasn't looking to go back to work. And I said, well, okay, I'll come do it till December. Well, it's now 8.5 years, and I'm still there. So it's been great fun. I mean, I love it. And when I got in, the classes didn't have any basically computer science in it. It was applications classes and keyboarding and educational games is what they did. So I've transitioned the curriculum a lot. I'm really lucky. I can say to the principal, I want to do this, and she'll go, okay, as long as it doesn't cost any money, I can do it. So so she's willing to listen to me. So we've changed it a lot, and I think the kids are enjoying it and learning things that they need to know, that they'll need in their futures. So
excellent. So yeah, I mean, we're kind of at that point in my school right now where one of my colleagues who teaches 7th and 8th grade computer literacy, is kind of in this weird place where she, it's traditionally been Microsoft Office stuff,
yeah.
And she's done a little bit of programming, but she feels very handcuffed because she feels like it's business ed at the high school. That's in high school teachers that are demanding these Microsoft Office skills before they make it up there. And I know she has both kids in 7th and 8th grade. So what would be your advice for something like that?
How often does she see them? Is it a semester-long class? Or?
Now I'm trying to think. It's weird not teaching classes because I don't know the schedule very well at all. I believe they have a day 1, day 2 system, so I believe it's a semester for a period of a 40-minute period.
I mean, it would be great if 1 year she could concentrate on, the office or word processing, things like that. I would suggest not just concentrating on Office, but that's me. The concentrating on word processing as a thing, not Microsoft Office as a thing, but and which is what I do. But if that's the skills they are required to have in high school in your district, then she kind of is going to have to address that. But really, if you do it right, they can do that they don't need a whole semester. She sees both 7th and 8th.
Yes.
So they have her. So do it for a semester in 7th, and then do other things in 8th. Kind of do a quick review of it in 8th, and then move on to more other things. Or do it for half the semester for each. Where we're going to touch on this. Now the thing I'm doing, like for example, my middle schoolers are doing. They're as part of Hour of Code. They did a mini research project on Grace Hopper because none of them, of course, had heard of her. And rather than me telling them, I wanted them to discover. And they're like, "Wow, why have I never heard of her?" It's like, yeah, I don't know. Why have you never heard of her? But and they did that. I used, of course, Google Apps and Google Slides, and they each built a slide. So and so did education, and somebody else did, a different section of it, and they built a presentation together. So now they're also doing presentation skills and research skills, but now it's tied in with computer science. Now we're debugging Scratch programs. So they're getting into the computer science stuff, and they're building a presentation with the code before, the code after, what they had to fix, why they fixed it. Okay, so
Wow.
they're still going to be they're building a presentation that could be done in PowerPoint just as it could be done in if you have to do PowerPoint just as it could be done in Google products. So you can kind of marry them together. You don't have to say one or the other. Okay, you can say, hey, and you can do alternative presentation skills. We're going to do PowerPoint, but we're also going to learn how to create some kind of presentation using Scratch, because alternate ways of presenting the material. So, sneak some in. Take, half of the semester once you've reviewed and you feel like, okay, they've got the basics of what they need to do in, in Office. Let's play in Scratch for a while. Because it's a good thing to teach, and make them, write a report on it in Word at the end. So they're showing you they can do MLA formatting in Word and writing a report on what they did, So you can kind of marry them together.
Excellent. Very cool.
And don't tell anybody. Just do it. Because if you tell somebody, they're going to say don't.
That's been my philosophy, and my advice to her is, you don't. You got a couple things going for you. One, you aren't in a core area, so I don't think people look at you with as much scrutiny as they would in other areas. And two, I mean, you're in a position where the curriculum probably better than the curriculum director does. So if you say you want to do something, she's probably going to just say, okay, that's cool, let's do that. So
right. And as long as you say you're not abandoning it totally. You're not saying I'm going to never teach them anything in Word or never teach them, then it is probably fine, because really they can learn those other skills. And who knows what's going to really happen in high schools in a couple years anyway. I mean, things transition,
Mm-hmm.
Now, are you guys Google Apps?
Yeah, we're Google Apps. I know kind of her end is the business ed end. Like, she's not a business ed teacher, but that's who still really primarily uses it. And I know the high school is probably transitioning more slowly than the other buildings away from Microsoft Office and to Google. I know there's still a lot of, I don't even know what the word would be towards it. Harumph, bah humbug, I don't know. Pull a word that's topical for the time of year, yeah.
Well, a lot of it, too, is they've got curriculum. They know they're familiar with it. I know for my teachers, it's like harder for the teachers than the kids to transition, because the teachers have been using it for longer and they're used to it, and they don't want to have to relearn how to do something in Office. In Google Apps, they'd rather just keep doing it in Office. So.
I know the students who come from my district, they feed into a high school who the tech director there refuses to go Google. So my little secret mission is to get all my kids all ramped up on Google, and then when they leave my district in 8th grade and go to him in 9th grade, that the grassroots effect. So I'm always a huge proponent on that.
Well, and it's true. If you can show the kids the benefit of Google Apps and the benefit of, for example, when we were doing the research with Grace Hopper, the research tool's right there. You can bring it in. You can do the link right on your slide. You bring in a picture, it's automatically linked. I mean, a lot of the stuff that they have to deal with if they're crediting and things on a PowerPoint, it's done for them on Google Slides. So, it's just, it makes it nice and beneficial. And if group projects, I mean, come on. Group projects with Word. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, definitely kind kind of a mix of all those things. I mean, we do a lot of good things, and there's a lot of things we can improve on. And yeah, I definitely think that there's definitely space there to input some of that programming stuff in there.
Yeah, you just slide a little bit of it in, even if it's end of 8th grade somehow, after you're sure they know what they need to know for the business app stuff. So.
Right now, of course, is the big Hour of Code week going on, and we talked a little bit before we went on air about Hour of Code stuff that we were doing. Why? I mean, this is the second year, I think, of it, but yet,
right.
What was there, like 100 million kids that have been involved in it this year, or something crazy like that?
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think is the appeal, or what is your viewpoint on that movement?
Well, I think they've marketed it really well. I mean, I think the point is to get people talking about coding and computer science, and the push ultimately is to make computer science part of the core curriculum, I'm sure. Because until it is, there's always going to be this, well, we don't have time to do that attitude. But I think that's the point. I think that's kind of where code.org wants to go. But they've done such a great job marketing it, and this year especially, I mean, mainstream media has picked up on it a lot more, which makes it easier for those states that are trying to get it as part of the curriculum in high school, where it counts, as, credits in high school that will count toward, oh, now you can go to college because you got that, as opposed to it's just an elective and you don't need to do it. I think it'll be helpful in those situations. And I think it's great because it starts exposing the kids to it. Like I was talking to my middle schoolers and I said, do any of you like science and want to go into some kind of science job? A couple of them, oh yeah, I want to be a marine biologist or a doctor or whatever. I said, so what if you'd never had science in school? Do you think that's what you'd want to do? And they're like, probably not. And it's like, right. And that's kind of the point with coding. If you've never tried it and never been exposed to it, how do you know whether you might want to do it? You don't. And by the time, we all know that by the time they hit even high school, but definitely college, there's stereotypes in place. And so they're not going to go into it because they think it's, for the geeky kid or the kid that's really great in math or whatever. And so they go, well, that's not me, and so I'm not going to go into it. So I think exposure, especially at the younger grades, is awesome. They go, well, this is fun. It's like solving a puzzle or playing a game, especially for the younger ones. It's like playing a game. But even when you're writing stuff in Scratch and debugging it and figuring out what's wrong and stuff, it's fun for them. It's not like, oh, you wrote a report and now I'm telling you have to revise it. That's not fun. But you wrote a game and I say, gee, why don't you make it do this too? Well, that's fun. But effectively it's revising, it's iterating, it's doing the same thing you want them to do in English. It's just more fun. So hopefully you can transport those skills and say, remember what you did here, where you did it over and over, and you got it better, right? Think about what you can do if you do it in writing, too. You'll get better, So kind of expose them to both ways. But I think the movement, the Hour of Code movement's great. I kind of don't like that they've co-opted Computer Science Education Week, because that's been around a long time. But it was never promoted. So, but I know that like CSTA is behind it and things like that. So it's good. I mean, there's a great amount of benefits to it. And I think, as long as it doesn't become too industry driven, I always worry that it's going to become this corporate thing as opposed to an education thing. But, at this point, still, it's about educating the kids and teaching them, and so I think it's a great thing. And so many people involved. It's awesome. I mean, Twitter is just lighting up with all the posts. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I was really encouraged by the reception that I got from other teachers when
Yeah.
I mean, it really wasn't even conversation, just an email, a couple
Yeah.
emails just about that it was happening. Like, oh, this was really cool. Like, I'm going to do this with my kids now. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, I would have never thought that this teacher was going to do that, but they're totally
Right.
doing it. Just like out of the blue, I didn't push them. They just saw the benefit. They saw it would be fun to do with their kids, and they're doing it. So I think that's incredible to take something that, if you say the word like computer science, it scares a lot of people off.
Right. Right. But if you say, oh, let's do an hour of code, see, I think it's been a great marketing tool that way, because teachers go, well, I can do an hour, as opposed to, you need to teach the semester-long course. Well, that's not going to happen. So I think getting that hour hopefully will lead to more than an hour. So,
I get to that second hour. Brian, now, have you seen, and I don't know 100% kind of where your journey is with computer science and programming, but kind of what have you seen change with the students in the schools you work with since Hour of Code started?
I see a lot, just the exposure, and a lot on, the media is what has been a big push for like my kids, because the majority of our kids is K6. So the media, the exposure, and now when you have Frozen, you can, code with Elsa,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
like, the one thing I don't like is that how, when they first marketed it was geared towards girls.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like that. If it was just in general code, I think that would have been just as fine. But I think when they always say get the girls coding, do with Elsa. Well, why can't they do Scratch? So it kind of bugged me when they just really geared it for the girls. But again, I think it's the exposure. The teachers are at first, they're putting their hands up, going, I don't know how to do it. And the other marketing genius, like you mentioned, is when you say code. Teachers don't want to do computer science, or even if you say, hey, do you want to do programming?
Right.
That they even put their hands up in the air, because it does sound overwhelming. But again, Hour of the Code, short, sweet, simple. Rainy day recess, what can we do?
Right.
Hey, let's bring out the Chromebooks and do
Right.
part of the Hour of Code. So I think for my kids, when I came to the district, I brought a lot of Chromebooks to the classroom. And giving them the opportunity, other than just doing Google Docs, doing some web-based stuff with Scratch, Tinker. I think that's where I see my kids are going. So again, it's kind of one of those things. I'm hoping when they get to the middle school, we develop a computer science elective that some kids do. So that's kind of what I've brought. So there is an interest a lot at the middle school for computing now, that we're going to start a coding club at lunch for those kids that just, like one of the teachers said, I have some kids that just don't really fit in on the playground and they get picked on. Can we maybe do Minecraft or something? And I said, yeah, sure, that's great. So I was going to start them on Minecraft in the lab and then transition into coding. And so that was kind of like my door in.
Right, right.
Very cool. Yeah, and I think it's great. And kind of to speak to your point about what the kind of marketed towards girls, and now we have the Made with Code that's really emphasized on girls. That really doesn't bother me too much. Like, I get that kind of from your perspective. I mean, girls can do Scratch too. Like, there's nothing that's male or female. But I think just the fact that there's such a lack of female presence in computer science, and Vicky, you can probably speak to that more. I think that that's important that there's an emphasis on that, because that's typically a group that isn't getting brought in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read an article yesterday or the day before on why it was all in the 80s when they started marketing to boys, marketing coding and things to boys, marketing Radio Shack, marketing computers to boys and things like that. That's when the numbers started dropping with women in computer science. And the thing also is, the women that are in it, we don't know. Like, I pulled out the posters for Hour of Code and hung them up. Didn't hang up Ashton Kutcher, sorry. I didn't have room, basically. And I didn't want 4 men to 2 women. So I picked three of the men, and they know the three that I hung up. They know Ashton Kutcher too, of course, but I wanted the others. So, we went over who these people are. Nobody knew who the women were. They didn't know, and yet they are very high up in companies, ed tech companies, and are very involved technically, but they don't know them. And I think because the face of computer science, even in large companies that have women, tends to be more the men, and even those that are CEO, they're not in the media as much as the men. Like Mark Zuckerberg's in the media way more than Marissa Mayer is. It's kind of like, and so you just don't see the women, the face of women. So I think they market to the girls because they want to bring girls in. They need marketing to minorities also because there's not minorities, but it shouldn't be exclusionary one or the other. I really wish the Frozen thing had Olaf in it too, because then then it would have been fine, boys or girls. Yeah, because I have boys that love Frozen too, so they like the Elsa thing too. They don't hate it, but so it's kind of like, but if Olaf had been in it, they would have liked it better probably, just because they see it as boys versus girls. So it is funny, and I understand why they're doing it, but I think it could be tough, and you could swing the other way. Not that more women will be in, but that the boys will feel excluded, and you don't want to do that either. You kind of want to hit all sides of things. So, and my girls do Scratch all the time. So in my schools, and they like Scratch, so it's not a problem. And they like Scratch a lot of times, because they can draw their own sprites, and they can, they love that. They're the ones that tend to do that a lot more than the boys do. The boys use the characters already there. The girls draw their own characters, but they're both programming the same, kinds of things. So.
Yeah. I love Let It Go. I always have to sing it whenever I hear it. My wife doesn't like it when I just start belting it around the house, but what do you do?
Did you see the one video that one school did on the Frozen coding? It is so funny. It's like little puppet people, and they're talking about coding. Elsa and Anna are talking about.
Oh no, I did see that. I don't know who shared it. Somebody shared it on Twitter. Maybe it was you. Yeah. I don't remember.
I know.
I saw it now. It was really good.
It's really funny. Yeah.
If you have a link, throw it to me in the chat. I can get it out on the.
I don't have it. I'll throw it up afterwards in the hangout.
Perfect.
In the thing. So
cool.
yeah, it's very funny.
So apparently, Olaf would have been awesome. Tara here was begging for Olaf. I think Olaf was definitely missed. My favorite part about Olaf is that the actor Josh Gad, who played him, is like one of my favorite comedic actors. Is not in enough stuff. So I just found it hilarious because I knew who the actor was. Like, I find him funny.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about it a little bit, but what do you think would be the key then? So the hour of code is great. We've got millions of kids coding. Awesome. How do we get to that second hour of code? What do you think could help make that transition, and maybe not for all the kids, but for a majority?
It's tough. I think you have to convince the teachers that even though computer science isn't part of the core curriculum, you have to convince them that it's teaching good skills that they can use in all areas. It's teaching grit, it's teaching perseverance, it's teaching, failure and trying again. It's teaching, not to mention the math skills and everything else that it teaches. Those are things we want in all subject areas. So, but this is a fun way of teaching that. It can also be used in the way I normally approach it is, so you got your kids, you're assigning a report. You're assigning an inventor's report for 5th grade. Great. We've talked about in the past how, okay, we're going to let them they can pick how they want to do that. They can make a poster, or they can make a video, so why not say, I can make a Scratch program about that. Instead of writing a report, I can, create it create a sprite that's the inventor and have him talk about himself in Scratch. Create an animation in Scratch, or a game that teaches about it in Scratch. It's another way for kids to show what they know. It doesn't have to be necessarily instead of. The problem comes in with the kids learning it, which is why if there are people in the schools that can help the teachers, partner with the teachers, to help teach those kids how to do that, whether it's after, right, see, that's you. So, but see, then you can say, then that's an alternative way for them to present. They don't have to do a PowerPoint. They don't have to write a 5-paragraph essay. They can create a Scratch project. As long as it covers all the material, what difference does it make? It's just another way of showing that they know that knowledge. And that can apply to any area. You need to tell me how, what about the periodic table. Make an interactive periodic table on Scratch. You need to show me that you know Spanish vocabulary. Create something in Scratch that shows me you know Spanish vocabulary. I know one teacher that's partnering with a language teacher to have her kids write English to Spanish dictionary in Scratch. So, there's all kinds of things that you can do. Pretty much anything that you would do a report on, or a poster on, and you can do in Scratch. It's great for storytelling, and it's great for any of those kinds of things. So, and Tinker, if you're using the Tinker lessons, not the puzzles and things, you can do it in Tinker if you would rather set up classes and things. So there are a lot of ways that you can do it. And if they get into learning more code, you can do a lot of things in things like Python or JavaScript, or create websites and learn, HTML and CSS, which isn't real coding, but it's also getting into real syntax. So, there's a lot of ways you can do it, but you have to sell it as you're giving the kids another option. And you may have kids that already are doing it. Like I have a kid that's been doing Scratch forever, and he would love the ability to not do that, essay, but to do it in Scratch, but and so get in the door that way, even if it's, okay, this kid already knows how to do it. Let him show you what he knows in Scratch,
Great. That's such a powerful kind of personalized learning type thing, is allowing students to choose their own way of showing it.
Right.
And there are students who would definitely increase their capacity with computer science because that's what they're comfortable with and enjoy doing. So that's a great way to sneak it in.
Right. Right, and I find a lot of the kids that are really good at Scratch and things are the kids that aren't necessarily the academic kids, because they're really good at trying things. They're used to failing, and so I failed at programming and I have to try it again. That's nothing new to them anyway. So, and they love it, and a lot of them, it's very interesting to see the ones that love that and pick it up and are good at it. They're not necessarily the kids that you would think are, and so it might be a great way for them to show what they know, whereas they're not going to create a great PowerPoint for you. They're just not. That's not their thing. So why not let them be successful, show it in a successful way? That doesn't get everybody, but it gets some of the kids. It gets a start, and if some kids see, oh, wow, that's really cool, then they may get interested and want to do it, The best way, though, is to make it part of the core curriculum. Honestly, to really get it adopted, it has to be part of the curriculum somehow. It doesn't have to necessarily be nationwide, but if a district or a school says this is important enough to include it, then, that's what happens, or a teacher that says, hey, I'm going to include this. I'm going to include, I can't do it for a whole semester, but maybe I can do it for a quarter, try, get it started that way.
Yeah, definitely all good things, and I think that the debate of getting computer science in the curriculum is a good one and a worthy one to have when you consider it's 2014 and our entire lives are based upon this thing that, even someone like me who I would say, I'm not a programmer, I don't know much, but I kind of get how it works. I still don't get how any of this stuff works. It's crazy. I love it all, but
Magic box.
Magic, yeah, black magic.
That's right.
All right, so you talked about Scratch a lot, and I can tell and you said it before, it was your favorite. What are some other tools you like to use to either teach programming or get students doing it?
Well, with the younger ones, I really love, my favorite with the younger ones is Scratch Junior. I like the creation tools more than I like the puzzle games. I think Codable and things like that are great intros, and they're great ways of teaching the concepts. But I think they need to create with it. I mean, because I'm always a big proponent of creating rather than consuming. So things like Scratch Junior, Hopscotch on the Scratch Junior and Hopscotch on the iPad, even the game portion of Tinker on the iPad, where you can actually create stuff, is pretty good, and they're tying it more and more to the lessons online also. So I think that's going to just keep enhancing. But with the younger ones, creation's hard. Scratch Junior is kind of the only where you're at, the primary grades. I tend to like, I use Bebots a lot with them, which is, it's great because it's hands-on. It's a robot, so they can physically touch it, which is really helpful. And you can tie it into any curricular area. You can make Bebot do whatever. I've used it in math things. I've used it for reviewing parts of the computer, sequencing of a story. I know Sam Patterson's used it for, solar system stuff. So you can use it for pretty much, you can tie it into any curricular area where you'd have, kind of things that the Bebot can go find in some way. And it teaches, especially for the youngest ones, it teaches directions and sequencing and putting things together. So it's great. It's a great start. Gets them thinking multi-step processes and thinking, how do computers work? I have to tell them explicitly how things work and things like that. And really, I mean, for me, our next step is always Scratch, because it lets the kids create, and it lets them create whatever they need, whether it's, I did stuff with 4th grade with missions last year, for Hour of Code we're doing animating our names with a bunch of grades and things along that line. So those are my favorites. I think there's so many out there and so many new ones coming out that my favorites of today probably won't be my favorites, tomorrow, because they're all new. Though I think Scratch has been around long enough and shown it has staying power that I think it'll always be in the mix. There's things, of course, I'd like to change about it. I wish it had classes like Tinker did. I wish it had spell check when you write, because I like the kids. The kids will create dialogues and things, but it doesn't do any spell checking. So they have to copy and paste things. I have them write in like Word or something so they can get the spelling right and then copy it and paste it in. But which isn't bad. It teaches them a bunch of other skills that they might need to know, especially when you're talking 2nd graders. 2 windows open, copying, pasting, right-clicking to correct spelling, all those things. So, which is another tie to Word and things you can do in Word.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, but they can all be improved. But I think as more and more people jump on the bandwagon because of things like Code.org, then I think there's just going to be more stuff out there we can choose from. And the Code.org curriculum is a really good place to start for teachers that are interested and don't know what to do, because it's very well organized. It may not go in depth enough into some of the computer science concepts, so if you really want to get into those, you can add some additional maybe offline activities. And it doesn't get into creation too much, but it's a good intro. And I am going to use the newer ones, the studio versions, with my younger grades next semester. So, because I think it's a great intro. So,
very cool. Yeah, I mean, I love that you kept harping on creation. I mean, that's really, I mean, at the top of Bloom's, and that's what we want to get get kids, and that's awesome. So I think that's a good way to think about when you're trying to pick a tool and you want to use programming. A lot of the others are great for teaching it, but that's one that actually gives them the opportunity to create. So I do like that part about it.
Yeah, it's funny because that sounded like me today at my leadership meeting. It was all about creation, and I told the principals that, hey, I got you all a cart of 20 iPad minis, but I'm going to be a stickler on the apps that I want people creating, not consuming. And
right.
So like some looked at me like, what are you talking about? So I had to not get on there and doing HDR types, basic stuff.
Yeah,
so
we
I
don't
was going to load them all up with the hopscotch and all that. Those are the only apps. And iMovie.
That's good. That's good, because that's really what they should be used for. I mean, it's like, let's not make them, electronic worksheets. That's crazy amount of money to be spent for electronic worksheets.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any, Vicky, do you have any neat, like, student success stories, anything that comes to mind to you of kind of the fruits of your labor, so to speak, and where you've seen former students go with this, or even things that have been created at any of your different levels?
Well, I have no major success stories yet. Hopefully I will. I've got a couple of boys that I think will. They're brothers, but I don't know that it's due to me. Their dad works for Apple, so that probably has something to do with it. But they're very, amazing. One's in 7th and one's in 3rd. So I expect to hear big things from them in the future. But to me, it's the little successes. It's seeing my 4th graders last year, which is an all-girls class. And we're not an all-girls school, but I have 2 classes that are all-girls. In this all-girls class, the very first time they used Scratch, they did a mission project in it. California Missions, as you may know, I don't know, you're not out in California, but that's a big thing in 4th grade.
I've heard of that. It's so big. It's made its way to Wisconsin. We know about it over here.
Yeah. And so I had them do a mission project in Scratch. So they basically used pictures and did a little tour of their mission in Scratch with that. But this was the very first project they'd ever done in Scratch, and they all did amazingly well. So it was awesome to see that, and they loved it. It wasn't like, oh, I hate this and whatever. And so now when I say we're going to do Scratch again, it's like a very positive thing. Just to see my 2nd graders drawing shapes in Scratch, and they don't have Siri the way that you do on an iPad to ask, what's 360 divided by 3 to give me the angle to make a triangle. With them, it was guess and test, and they learned that if it overlapped, it was too big. If it had a gap, it was too small, and so they, guess and test. And they, drew, squares and circles and circles is tough, and triangles, and then something else, whether it was a hexagon or an octagon or something. So, just little successes like that are great. To see my kids, the first year I did any coding, which was 4 years ago, and it was with middle school, I did a thing called March Madness with my 8th grade, and basically it was in March, it's like you're going to learn something new, and coding examples were given, and they could have proposed anything they wanted. I had 3 boys put a computer together, and then everybody else did some kind of coding. And they were offered a bunch of things, and I was tickled when 3 girls chose JavaScript. All the boys that were coding did Scratch, but the 3 girls chose JavaScript, and they found it tough, but they kept going with it. They didn't do a whole lot with it at the end, a little teeny game, but it was fun to see them and to have 3 girls pick that. And they all ended up, all the kids with Scratch ended up with a game, and even though it wasn't graded, it was like the whole point was you're going to learn it. And even if you don't end up with anything at the end, that's okay, because I had to document their process and blog about it, basically. But they, it was like, but they all did. They all ended up with some kind of game, which is amazing, And, so it's a lot of stuff like that, and hopefully someday, I do have a couple of kids who are, probably they're going, okay, I never thought I'd like this, but I think I'm going to, take some classes in it in high school and stuff, so, which is good. So exposure is good. So
Hashtag kids can code.
that's right.
All right. So what do you? This is probably a really big, loaded question. What do you see then, either education or our society being like in 20 years as it relates to programming?
Boy, it was funny when I read that when I thought about that question. I was like, I'm not good at predictions of the future. If you'd asked me when I first was working on computers in the late 70s, and people were going, oh, someday everybody's going to have their own computer, I was one of those people who laughed at that. So I'm not necessarily a good predictor of the future. But ultimately, I think what's going to happen is there's going to get more and more personalization of things, and the ability for people to kind of code their own solutions to things. But I think they'll get simpler. You're always going to have, of course, the really geeky stuff and typically it'll be in big industries and in government. I think that's going to stay, the more traditional. But I think as we see with Swift and things like that, the languages are getting easier for people to use. So I think you're going to see more things like apps that'll let you write apps that aren't $10, and so I think it'll be easier for everybody to create something if they choose to. But I also see that, and I've seen it in industry for years, and I see it still happening. I don't think you're going to have a lot of the just coders where what you do is just sit and code all day. I think most of that will be outsourced. A lot of it is today in industry. It's not done in the U.S. It's done in India. It's done in other countries. And I think that trend will continue just because it's costly, and that's something that it's not really that hard to write the code. What's hard is to come up with the idea, to design the app, to say, here's how I want it to work, and to oversee that it gets written right, and that kind of thing. I think that's going to be the work of the future more so than and I can code it. You probably have to code it in order to prototype it to show the people what you want, but you're not going to be getting in and necessarily doing the nuts and bolts coding. But who knows? I mean, it may be that more and more work comes back to the U.S. Be nice, but I see more and more outsourcing. Just with friends that I know that are still in the industry, more and more stuff gets outsourced. The people that still have jobs that I know are the people that are in the design level more than the coding level. The coding level, people had to learn more the design end than if they wanted to stay and keep jobs. So.
Fair enough. Well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. I know that's a tough question, but it's always fun to just hear kind of what people's visions are and different things like that. So before we wrap up, I did want to mention one thing, kind of relates to something I'm involved in. But I know that you've been involved in Q Rockstar in the past, and I know we have a great event scheduled for Melbourne coming up in January. So for anybody that would watch this and wants to learn more about coding, can you talk about what a Q Rockstar experience is like, both as a participant and as faculty?
Q Rockstar is amazing because, most PD I go to, well, at big conferences, it's a sit and get thing. You go to a 45-minute session or a 55-minute session, and they throw a million tools at you, or even in coding presentations, which I've done in the past, it's really tough in 45 minutes to cover stuff and build something. It's really hard. When the thing with the Q Rockstar experience is the sessions are deliberately long. They're like 2 hours. And the presenters are told you're not supposed to present most of the time. You're supposed to do a little bit of presenting to get people started, and then they're supposed to create something. You leave with something created. So it's an awesome experience from a coding perspective. You would somebody might come in and show you, if you've never done anything, they might come in and show you Scratch, show you the interface, give you some challenges and say, okay, you're going to make, make an All About Me project in Scratch. Tell me all about you using Scratch, and then you'll get back together and the participants will demo that, and then maybe they do another challenge and things like that. As a presenter, it's amazing because you present 2 times a day, but you present the same session, and then it's a 3-day thing, so you present a different session every day, but you present the same one twice, so you prepare 3 sessions basically. But what I found as a presenter is you learn so much from the people you're teaching, because you're not standing up there just pretending that you know everything, which we all are pretending we know everything. You stand up and you do a little bit of that, and then you interact, and you learn so much more with, the questions that the people come up with and the how-tos and this stuff. And it's great to see people walk out going, oh, I can do that in my class. Because so often you go to professional development and you come back and you think, yeah, I need to research that some more and play with it so I can maybe use it, and then you never do because we don't have time. So I think one of the things Q Rockstar gives you is the time. It gives you the time to actually play with and learn whatever it is the tool is, whether that's Google Apps or whether it's coding or whether it's, how to use iPhone photography in your class, whatever it is that you're taking a class in. So it's a pretty cool experience, and it's small teacher to presenter to attendee ratio, which is great. You're not going to be in some huge hall with 100 people or 200 people. You're going to be in a room with 10, 15 people all wanting to learn about whatever this thing is. So it's great.
Totally awesome. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Any last things you want to mention, places to find you, pieces of advice?
I tried to put a lower third on it. Didn't work.
I see it. It's there.
Oh, it's there? Okay, good.
Yeah.
I didn't see it. It's interesting. So, yeah, I'm on Twitter, Visions by Vicky, at Visions by Vicky. I have a website, visionsbyvicky.com. Anytime I present, I put handout of my presentation up there. So if you want to, I do a lot on coding, so there's a bunch of stuff out there. I'm on Google+, Vicky Sedgwick. Tweet at me. Email me, visionsbyvicky@gmail.com. It's great. Just code, try it. What I tell people is dip your toes in, try it. The point of it is to fail and try again, So don't worry if it doesn't work the first time. I guarantee you, as someone who was a coder, real programmers, their stuff doesn't work the first time either. Or the second or the third. Okay, I mean, there are people. There are people that their whole job is to break other programmers' code so that they can fix it. So that
totally.
Awesome. I can certainly attest to your willingness to help other people because, like I said, I know we've had conversations in the past where I've been like, you know what, I've got this class, I got no idea what I'm gonna do with this. Help me, please.
Glad to help. It's fun.
Great. Thank you. Brian, really appreciate you coming out tonight. I know it's been a while since we've gotten a chance to talk ourselves, so great having you. Anything you want to mention?
No, I just say it was great to be here again. And again, I'm a huge proponent also of the Q Rockstar, so loving that. I love the series coming out soon, so it's I presented at it, and it's changed my own presentation style, so
right.
Totally excited for that in the future. That's coming up in the new Q Rockstar season. So
yeah,
excited about that.
That's great.
Very cool. Well, hey, I'm Josh, and anybody that checks us out in the future or watches tonight, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to just talk with other educators. That's where the power is. I was just at a conference, and I would say that the best session at the conference was the late night session with 2 other guys where we just talked about stuff, Like that's really where the power is, and
yeah.
When it comes to trying something new and challenging like coding, like get your strengths from other people, do it with somebody else, do it together, talk about it. Talk about it with your kids, do it with your kids. I mean, I think that there's so much power in being like really, really not just saying you're this, the guy on the side, but you actually are learning with them because you don't know. Like,
Right.
I think there's just so much power there. So
It is definitely powerful for the kids to hear "I don't know" from you and realize that their teacher doesn't know everything and needs to learn too. So
excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Brian. Stay safe out there in California. Don't get blown away. And I'll try not to get buried by snow later in the winter on your behalf, too. So,
great. Thanks, Josh.
thanks. Have a good night.
Thanks, Josh.